Hi everyone and welcome back to my podcasts. My name's Stephen. I'm an ex-Royal Naval clearance diver. I was a salvage diver and I was also an offshore air and saturation diver. And these podcasts, these little stories are really about that period of my life. Some of them are interesting, some of them are quite sad, and some of them are actually frightening. I hope you enjoy them. This is episode 8. And this starts really the period of my commercial diving. Now, in the last one, I finished the salvage work on HMS Argyll, and I'd been to Fort William to do an MPI course, an underwater inspection course, looking for cracks on wells underwater. And I'd done that course to help me get offshore. But while I was on the course, I met two bell divers. Now, they were support offshore in the North Sea for drilling. So in each drill rig has its own bell diving team, just in case there's any issues and problems. A lot of it's required by the insurance companies. So when I was there, I really got on well with these two guys. Actually drove me back to Dundee. They gave me a name and introduced me to somebody in IUC. It's a diving company. It was up in Aberdeen at the time, International Underwater Contractors. So I eventually got an interview with the managing director. He was a typical American, I would say, that was in the North Sea at that time. You know, he was loud and brash. Him and I got on great. He interviewed me for a job. He said, I have a job for you. Now, are you quite happy to go to Singapore and then work in Thailand on a rig? And I thought, yeah, sounds brilliant. Let's go. And it was really strange because I was sitting there and we were getting on really well. He quite liked the idea of me being an ex-Navy diver because he was as well. So the two of us got on particularly well. And I always remember him. He said, just sit there a minute, Stephen. And he wandered through. And I could hear him talking to his secretary. And then he comes back and he says, yes, I've just told my secretary to book you on a flight in 2 weeks' time to fly to Singapore. And from there, we'll give you more details. You'll stay in a hotel. And you get details from there how to get to Thailand to fly offshore. I was like, what? Just like that. And it seemed bizarre at the time. And true enough to his word, my tickets arrived at my house. So I had the tickets, all the details, which hotel I'm going to. I flew from Edinburgh to London to Singapore. And this was in the 80s. It wasn't as luxurious, as easy as it is today. But I do remember, I think I was pretty naive, and I converted pounds to Singapore dollars. And I think it worked out about 130 Singapore dollars I had with me and a credit card. And that was it. That's all I had. Flew out there, arrived. I remember getting off the plane. Remember, I'd not really been to Asia ever. You got off the plane in Changi Airport, the old Changi Airport. I remember getting off the plane and thinking, my God, these engines are bloody warm. In fact, it was just the oppressive, humid heat of Singapore. And there's also a smell of burnt vegetation. I remember that. So I got off there, got a taxi to the VIP hotel. And I was to stay there for 2-3 nights, waiting for the crew change. So when I was there, I didn't sleep. Time zone, I could not really sleep. I was wandering around Singapore, doing bits and pieces. I had to get a bank account from the Chase Manhattan. So I went in there and ordered all that kind of stuff so I could be paid to a bank in Singapore. One of the things was I was meant to get paid $75 a day for every day I was there. So on shore, and there was a rate for offshore. And my bill for the 3 nights in the VIP hotel, I think it came to, it was a lot more than sort of what I had in cash. And I remember I was getting a bit uncomfortable because I was thinking, they're going to ask me for the money. And I had my credit card, but I really didn't want to use that credit card. It was for emergencies. But when I went to speak to the manager, I was just asking about, is there anybody else coming in from IUC? And he said, yes, diving supervisors coming in. And I met Ken Lloyd, big, tall American supervisor, great guy. I mean, really brilliant guy. And I introduced myself, and the first thing I said to him, is there any possibility you could pay my bill? And he went, yeah, no problem at all. I'll take care of the bill. Because we were getting the $75 a day, we were meant to get it as soon as we landed, but it never happened. Probably due to the fact that I needed to have a bank account, etc. there. So he paid the bill, no problem. He wasn't going offshore that particular time. He was coming in to do something else, and he was going offshore a week later. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I had to head down to a hotel in the centre of Singapore. When it got down there, there's a club called 392 Club, I think it was called, in the main street in Singapore, and along from that was a hotel. So we all met there, the crew, and most of the crew were American or European. So we're all sitting there. I knew nobody, obviously. And I was speaking to a couple of people who helped me, said, okay, there's a bus come and you'll be taken down to a military airport. Well, it's Changi, but the military side of Changi Airport, which I always thought was very strange. So we jumped on the bus. This is 4 o'clock in the morning. We arrive at this airport, obviously checked thoroughly. It's really strange. Every bag was checked. So we got through. And I got on this plane. It was an old Dakota. After that, we used it every 2 weeks, basically, for crew change. But there it was, old Dakota. Got on there, and we took off. And about halfway through, you'd get, I can't remember how many hours it took. I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, something like that. And maybe less than that. And you get your little box of food, etc. So there's quite a few people on it. Once we landed at a place called Songkhla in Thailand, which was another military base in Thailand. And I'll tell you a story about that. After 4 or 5 times, I was coming in one morning and we were landing in Songkhla. We landed, as it was coasting in to get parked, I noticed there was just loads of military people running around with guns, really like there was something going on. And the pilot just said, do not leave the plane. There's been a coup, and a military coup, and just stay on the aircraft until we tell you to get off. In fact, they went round and closed all the blinds, said, don't take any photographs, don't look out the window, just wait. We'll bring you some drinks, cold drinks and food, just wait. And it took about 3 hours for us to eventually get off. And they said, yeah, safe for you guys to get off now. And we got off the plane at that time, and then we got our normal transport to the heliport at Songkhla. So exciting stuff, but that was about halfway through my year on what's called the EW Thornton. She was a floating drill rig, and I'll send a little photograph, quite an unusual one. So I had a moon pool in the middle. So on that morning, my first morning, I get on the bus, get to the heliport, we're all sitting waiting, and I look across and there's an old Bell Huey helicopter. It's like you were in Vietnam, honest to God. It had the doors open, had the canvas seats inside, and I always remember going out with 3 or 4 other guys, and we all got in. I strapped myself into the canvas. I was on the outside. Nobody liked being on the outside for some reason. I thought, oh, this is going to be quite exciting. So the pilot comes across, American guy, no co-pilot. I looked down and the co-pilot's instruments had been almost dismantled. So he gets in, gives us a quick brief, and he just goes straight up, nose down, and belts along this the runway and straight over the top of the trees. It was like being in Apocalypse Now, that movie. It was just bizarre. My first time, and it was very exciting. I would tell you, it was just mad. You were a good hour out to the Gulf of Thailand, where the rig was. Like I say, it was a floater, and it was anchored. And she was drilling. She was exploration drilling. When I landed on board, there was the other supervisor who, I always remember, I can't remember his exact name, but he always looked like Burt Reynolds. In fact, he got a little job in Singapore, and that was to imitate Burt Reynolds. So he made a little bit of money on that. He was not a bad lad, actually. He was not bad. Good supervisor. So I got on board, met the rest of the guys. There was a US Marine there, ex-US Marine, ex-Royal Marine there, who I got on incredibly well with. Great guy, great. He was a bit older than me, but a good lad. And there was a couple of others, 2 other Americans as well. They weren't military, but they were commercial divers. I'd never used trimix, so it was helium, oxygen, nitrogen mix. And this was very well protected. So you never really got to look at the decompression schedule. When you did a dive, it was closed and locked away. The mixing of the gas was done almost manually. It was very strange. I'd never really experienced anything like that. To me, breathing it didn't make any difference, but it did help seemingly with, to improve decompression times. My first dive there, after, meeting everybody, you get a run through on the bell, you get to get inside the bell. So the bell sits in the same moon pool right next to the drill, or the conductor that's going straight to the seabed with the drill in it. And at the bottom of that is a blowout preventer, sits on the seabed. So you get to learn a lot about drill rigs, which I had virtually no idea. I always remember I wanted to get in the water and start diving. We would dive in overalls. The water was like 24 degrees, crystal clear, beautiful, absolutely stunning. So I jumped in the moon pool just on surface air. I always remember going below, and there was these remora. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They kind of try and stick to fish. They were all under the hull. And as soon as I got close to them, they all tried to stick to me. I was like, what the hell is going on? They're fairly big things as well. And they were like trying to get onto me. The guys seemingly knew that was pretty much what was going to happen. But I do remember as I got to the surface, I was, getting out the water. Imagine I just have a pair of overalls on. It was almost like a massive burning sensation around my neck and chest, and my whole sort of neck flared up red. And this was seemingly either red fire coral, some coral, whatever, or spores in the water that had come from what I'd been doing, cleaning round the intakes. It wasn't pleasant. It just flared up completely red. It was like being burnt. And I'd had this a few times as well, again after that. So that was the first dive. And then you start to learn about the system, maintaining the system. We weren't diving every single day, but we would make sure we were maintaining, we were going through drills, which I quite liked. We would lower the bell with the divers in it, so myself and Mike, the ex-Royal Navy, Royal Marine, good guy. 2 of us would go in. That was my first time, and we were doing recoveries, so just practicing recoveries. One would be in the bell, one would be locked out. We would simulate somebody going unconscious. I'd put my helmet on, lowered it. There's like a little pulley you pull down below as you drop through the moon pool inside the bell. So the bell's dry, it's fed from gas from surface and communications, etc. The first thing you do is get that pulley as low as possible, because you want to go out, get the unconscious diver, bring him in under the bell in the little moon pool, in the trunk we call it, and you would lock him on. There's a centre chest pull for him. So you'd get him locked on there, you'd climb up inside, and then you would use a pulley to pull him up inside the bell. So the first time I was doing this, Mike's a big guy, he's like 6'4", and he was very conscious of his hair. He was losing it, and he was very, very sensitive about his hair. And as I was pulling him up, obviously the big guy in the trunk, his arms are jammed in, and I get him up, and it's a Kirby Morgan helmet with a zip up the back. So unclip it, unzip. I'm taking it off. What I didn't realise was a big lump of his hair had got caught in the zip. So when I unzipped it and put the helmet to the side, it was hanging. It was pulling on his hair. I always remember this. His hands were jammed in, so he couldn't get his hands up. And he was screaming at me, "Stephen, you bloody hair, get my blood." And oh shit, I lifted the helmet up and I'm trying to get his hair out. And I always remember this. He looked at me and he said, Because I said, I'm going to have to cut your hair. And he goes, don't cut my hair. Stephen, don't cut my hair. I'm telling you, don't cut my... And the more he was doing this, the more he was trying to struggle, I started to laugh. And the supervisors were going, look, just bloody cut his hair and get him in. So I got my knife out, and he's going, if you cut my hair, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to, you can't escape. So I cut this big lump of hair out. And as soon as I cut it, it dropped out the helmet, put the helmet down. I was holding it in front of him, and he goes, you can't escape. You put my helmet back on, and I'm going to come back and get you. And I said to him, I'm not putting your helmet back on unless you promise not to kill me. He's a bit upset, but he's never going to kill me. So I put his helmet back on, and he come back to the bell, and he was not a happy bunny. He was not happy. Part is the back of his head had a little patch where I'd cut it. These exercises were superb. And it ensured that we all knew the bell inside out. We knew what to do if the other diver became unconscious. Everything was done on a nice procedure. And I was very impressed by that. Like I say, the times we would be called to dive when there would be a problem, normally around the BOP or one of the cables. So the drill would come down on the base plate at the bottom with the BOP on top. It had 4 guide wires, and on these guide wires we'd slide a camera down as well. But these 4 guide wires would sometimes either break or not be successful. So we were getting a lot of these sort of, it was about 300 foot to 270 foot deep. Most of the diving was round about that sort of 180 to 200, really at the top of the BOP. Really interesting work on that. And the EW Thornton itself was an interesting rig, a floating rig. The food on board was superb. It was an American rig. So you can imagine the food was superb. And it had to be because there wasn't much else. It was a massive drill rig. Most of the people on board were the drillers. And they were really technically the most important people as well. They worked incredibly hard. So you had this rig 24 hours a day drilling, and we were expected to respond 24 hours a day. And we did a routine of down in the morning, we'd do maintenance, make tests, things, make sure stuff was working. Every second or third day, we'd be putting the bell in, we'd do some diving, just swimming in and out. But we did have one of the divers that came out. He was Hawaiian, massive guy. And he had actually been on the crew with Jack Cousteau's ship, which I can't remember the name, and I'll put up. That was his claim to fame. He actually worked on that. Great guy. And a few times, can you imagine this in the North Sea, a few times he'd go down to the moon pool, he'd put on his goggles, no equipment, he would have his spear gun, because round the conductor you would always get loads of tuna down there, and you would just swim down. I mean, sometimes 60, 70 foot, it was crystal clear, boom, shoot one of them, come back up, put it up for eating that night on the ship. I mean, you can imagine doing that now. People would freak out completely. Anyway, as we were progressing, obviously, it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and I was now staying in a flat with some of the other divers, with Ken and a few of the ones that had rented a flat, and it was 347B River Valley Road was the flat. I actually went back 20 odd years later, still there, looked exactly the same. So you had your 2 weeks off in Singapore, and then we went through the same routine again, 4 o'clock in the morning, flying to Songkhla helicopter out to the EW Thornton. During that period, we had the Vietnamese boat people coming across from Vietnam, across the Gulf of Thailand, and obviously a few of them had spotted that this rig was there, American rig, so they were taking a bearing on the rig. And for a while, we just had, every day and night, we would have these boat people appearing. I mean, horrific, honestly. I mean, I was a young lad, and The worst one, I think, was when they had come along. These are not big boats, but you could smell, we'd bring them alongside to give them food and water, but we would not allow them on board because it was American soil. So we'd wait for the Thai Navy guys or supply boats to come out, and then we'd transfer them to that. And then they'd be taken in as refugees into Thailand. But one time I'm looking down and they came along, and a lot of the time, they were not in good condition. They'd been at sea for a long time. But this particular one was dead bodies, obviously, on the upper deck. They were wrapped in cloth. But you could smell it. I don't know if you ever smelt dead people, but it's quite a distinct smell. And because, there was no breeze, we're looking down on them. And I remember this guy he had a baby and he was holding up the child to show us he had this baby. And there's nothing, we're not allowed to do anything. But we did, put down a medic. We would give them loads of water, as much food as we could to make them reasonably comfortable. But just the fact of seeing the dead bodies, and it was a bit of a shock, to be honest. What really pissed me off really was that there were some people taking photographs. Can you imagine if this happened now? Every man and his dog would be taking a photograph. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do that. I had my camera and everything, but I just couldn't do it. It's like stealing a piece of somebody's soul. I don't know. Just couldn't do it. And I got angry at some of the other people that were doing it. As part of that, as they were taken away, their boats would be alongside ours, and we had to be very careful. We couldn't have these things floating around in the Gulf of Thailand. So what we were doing is we were dropping big lumps of steel straight through the hull and breaking them up for them to sink. But myself and Mike, we got we would nip down and take the props and things like that off, because the local guys that came in, they were really keen to get the props, and some of them had engines, and they'd take the engines away and things like that. At least they were being recycled in some way. But Mike and I always remember were jumping off the side of AW Thornton, and as I jumped, I'd never seen a shark before. As I jumped, I remember this guy going, "Sharks!" It's like a bad time to tell me, no, I have no choice. I'm going in the water and you go shouting at me, "There's sharks." Could be a good thing. Both of us hit the water. And I remember going down and just spinning around. And all I seen was remora, these, the big suckerfish. So I'd never seen a shark. But I tell you what, it was a bit of a fright all the way down till I sussed out there were no sharks. And then Mike and I would go and take the prop off and allow them to take the engine out and etc. Just to help, something to do. But because we were smashing them and they were sinking, one of them actually got caught up on the bottom of the hull. These things are reasonably big and they've got rope and everything. And it was part of the rope was wrapped round where the prop was. And because all this weight of the boat was on this two sort of ropes, they were tight. They were like bar tight. Mike and I went down. The one thing you do is you stay well above. So we were making sure there was no rope, or if there was rope, we were cutting it and getting rid of it. So there really was only these two strands of rope holding this boat below. And I remember, we were using a hacksaw to cut through. It was that solid and tight. We're cutting through and you can hear bing, bing, and then poof, gone. Instantly, this boat just drifting way down. That was reasonably dangerous, but we had to get rid of it. It was attached to the AW Thornton. And from that point on, we asked the supply boats just to take them out and destroy them further away from us. So that was a story, some of it quite sad, actually, of that particular part. I do remember that I was stabbed in the leg, right in the thigh. And another guy, Ken, big beard, this guy, an American diver. And we're on deck, but we've got shorts on and we've got boots, rig boots on. Ken was cutting this, and everybody had deck knives. And I'm standing talking to the supervisor, and he slipped and he stabbed me right in the calf with this knife. And it was a buck knife, I always remember that. So he stabs me right in the calf. And I remember looking down thinking, shit, he's just stabbed me. And he looks up at me and just pulls the knife out. And of course, probably one of the worst things you can do is you just start bleeding profusely. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I've been stabbed. And I wasn't too sure. I thought, should I lie down? Should I stay where I am? Should I, and then eventually I was like, bloody hell, pouring blood into my boot. So I went along to the Thai medic, and he judged the depth and gave me injections, stitched it up. So I wasn't able to dive most of that trip. The next trip I'm only on for a day or so, and they want me to run down to about 60 feet. The camera had jammed slightly on the frame, so I jumped in very quickly, grabbed hold of the frame, pointed down and pushed. And because this camera had been running up and down the wheels, it had created an absolute razor-sharp edge. And as I pushed my hand, it just opened up the massive cut in the upper part of my hand. I remember it was so sharp, you kind of almost didn't feel it. Then I remember thinking, why is all that dark stuff clouding around my hand? And then I realised it was a massive gaping hole in my hand where almost right down to the bone. Back up to the medic again. So eventually he stitches up my hand. He must have thought, this guy's really accident prone. He's just had been stabbed in the leg the trip before. Now he's opened up his hand. And again, I didn't do much diving that trip. But of course, sometimes you do a whole trip without an actual working dive. Now, you may be doing exercises and testing equipment, etc., and making sure everything's ready to go. But sometimes you do a 2-week trip and not really do a proper dive. There was another dive where they needed to see what sits on this conductor is what's called a bullseye, and it basically is a massive circular dome, glass dome, and inside were rings with steel ball, and it allows you to determine the alignment or if the drill's slightly off. They were having problems getting the drill down and wanted to know what degree it was at. Remember, this was the 80s, and they just wanted it done like now, like this second, time's money, just get in the water. And because we were talking, and these guys had never done any deep air diving before, I was pretty much the only one. So they volunteered me so I dropped on, got my surface air gear on, and dropped down. It was about 220 feet, something like that, I think. I remember heading down, it gets darker, and you get these thermoclines where you're going down. Remember, I've just got overalls on, and you get like a chill. It's like freezing, then it's warm, and it's freezing. It's really very strange. But as I'm going further down, I begin to see the bullseye. It's a massive thing, it's a huge thing. But not only that, I start to see these tuna, massive tuna, swimming round, and because of the vibration, it attracts them. As I'm swimming down, obviously I'm getting more and more nitrogen narcosis. So when I get down to 150, I'm beginning to feel it seriously. When I'm getting down to about 200, I've got slight tunnel vision, and I'm out of my tree. When I get there, eventually stop. And I remember being fascinated by the tuna and really having to take my eye away from them because they seem to have massive eyes. And they were just coming out of the big things as well. And they were just swimming round me and round me. And then the guys on the surface going, Stephen, are you there? And we're like, yeah, I'm here. Right, give me a reading. And you had to determine where the ball was in relation, to the ring. So east, west, 2 degrees, 12, whatever. I remember just keep saying, it's 2 rings, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 rings east, 12 o'clock. And I kept saying it and over and over and over again. And they were screaming at me saying, shut up, we've got it. Shut up and leave bottom now. I was well out of my tree. Slight tunnel vision, which is a weird thing to have. Eventually I start coming up. Your head begins to clear. And you have a couple of stops in the water, which is, I never particularly liked. If you're just dangling on a wire in the middle of the Gulf of Thailand, it's a very strange thing. It's a very lonely place to be. And, 10 or 15 minutes, keep moving, 10 or 15 minutes. Then I'm on the surface, then I'm surface decompression, which is an interesting thing. And I'm sure it's banned now. I did a lot of surface decompression. And that is, hit the surface, run across the deck, jump in a chamber, door close, blow you down to 6 feet, back on O2, and then they slowly decompress you. It wasn't my first experience of that. I had some of that in the Navy, but it was my first experience as a commercial diver. But it was an interesting dive, but to be truthful, it was not one that I particularly, when I think about it now, it was pretty dangerous. But that's one thing about the drill rig. Its priority is to drill. So if anything's stopping it drilling, you have to sort it now. There's no discussion. It's now. Now the rig itself, we did a lot of kind of maintenance. We go down and we'd lock out and we'd do a survey, check valves on the BOP at the maximum depth. But your bell would sit probably at 200, 220, and you would maybe drop down to 260, 270 to do the work. But it was quite exciting. You still had reasonably good visibility at that time. One of the things I do remember is a whale shark coming round the rig. It just blew my mind completely. And we actually got in the water in the moon pool to see it. It was going round probably around about 100 feet initially. You could see it. Beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen one there. That's breathtaking. Frightening and breathtaking, even though they probably won't hurt you. The colour. The colour is just stunning. And I wanted to get closer, and as it came up, it was sitting about 60 feet. It never came any shallower than that. Now, I'm not too sure it was the vibration that was attracting it, but it was great. We would just sit it probably about 30 or 40 feet on air and just watch it. But absolutely stunning, beautiful. I only wish I'd been able to take photographs because it was such a spectacle. And that was very unusual. I mean, the whole time I was there was probably the only real fish that I actually seen. You had the remora under the hull and a few other little fish. But realistically, in the middle of Gulf of Thailand, you don't see a great deal. So we were continuing on that 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And it was a year's contract. We were getting paid monthly. We were living in a flat in Singapore. It was all pretty comfortable. When our last trip, we had a German Alex, he was a German-American, a small guy, really, smaller than most of us. He had been sacked the trip before, so he wasn't coming back, but he had left some kit, like we all do, on board. He asked Ken Lloyd, the supervisor, if he would pick it up and bring it in for him, because he was very close to the flat where we were staying. So Ken got his bag and we were going off the rig. So we were leaving rig, choppered into Songkhla, and then Songkhla into the military base. Now, when we got into the military base, we get on the Dakota and fly to Changi Military. Now, remember, when we arrived there, we were checked. Our bags were opened every single time. Everyone. Didn't matter. I'm standing next to Ken. I put my bag up. They're searching my bag. This is Singapore, remember? Ken puts Alex's little bag up. They open it. And right on top, even I looked at it, right on top was the cellophane, little crumpled up. And the guy opened it. And right on top is Thai seeds, marijuana. And I looked and I thought, oh, that looks like, and Ken shit himself. I was crapping myself because Singapore are not tolerant of drugs at all. And Ken, the guy goes, oh, you bring drugs, bloody marijuana. And Ken goes, no, it's not my bag. I'm carrying it. Didn't matter. They said, you carry the bag. You come with us now. And within seconds, Ken was on his way. These guys carrying the bags and taking them away. I always remember Ken's face. He sort of turned to me and he said, Stephen, can you get on to the American embassy or anything? Get hold of the company and let them know what's going on. And I thought, Jesus, this is a nightmare. And I remember the guy that was looking in my bag. I said, look, can I it's not his bag. Oh, when he was carrying it, it's his bag. And I said, can I speak on his behalf? Is it possible for me to? And he goes, yeah, okay, you come with me. So we went through, and there was a room. And by now, Ken was in his underpants. All his kit, all Alex's bag had been laid out, and all Ken's bag was laid out, emptied completely. And you could tell. I mean, the clothes in Alex's bag would never fit Ken. Never fit him. Ken was 6'4". Alex was probably about 5'4". Anyway, I said, look, I'd just like to say that this isn't, this isn't Ken's bag. This guy left it on the... And I could not believe they were very reasonable. One of the main guy, he came across and said, look, this is a tiny amount. Very tiny. This is a small amount. Obviously for personal use, not for selling. And looking at the clothes, it's obvious they're not his clothes. But he was carrying it. So he is responsible. Unless you can prove 100%. And we were like, well, is there anything in the pockets? No, we've looked in all the pockets. The guy as he was talking to us, he took hold of the bag, Alex's bag, and turned it inside out. Said, look, there's nothing. And just in the corner was a little piece of paper. And this is a true story. And he pulls it out, and it's like a receipt. Because if we bought anything to leave Singapore, we'd buy sometimes some bits and pieces, and then we would need the receipt. You would get a receipt that you had bought this, they had went through customs, etc. And there on this receipt was Alex's name, his address, everything. I swear I could not believe it. And the guy was like, oh, so what's his second name? Oh, okay. Now, this proves that this is not your bag. And then they took... I'm sure they took Ken away, and I sat there it was a good hour, maybe 2 hours we're sitting there. They just ripped in about Ken, and they wanted more and more and more until they were 100% satisfied that it was an accident, that Ken never took drugs at all. Anyway, eventually, obviously the drugs were taken away and the bag was handed back. Ken came out. And oh my God, the man was drained. I always remember that. He looked like he'd aged 100 years, I swear. Because from there, obviously we'd missed the bus and everything. So we got a taxi straight into Singapore, sat down and had a couple of cold beers. And as we were talking, he was like, Stephen, I see my whole life in a prison in Singapore. My whole life just gone. That's what I see. And I can understand that. Singapore are not tolerant at all. And I had to persuade Ken not to go and beat up Alex immediately. But what happened was one of the guys had seen what had happened, contacted Alex, and Alex had legged it. And he never really got an opportunity to have a chat with Alex, which is probably a good thing. But I do remember that. It will stay with me for probably all my life. And I'm sure, Ken, if you ever see this, Ken, you will remember that time as well. The contract eventually comes to an end. We did have a great party in the flat when it all ended. It was sad to leave the guys. After a good year, it would have been nice to continue, but the rig was moving to somewhere else and was going underneath another diving company. We had a little party in the flat, and we were a bit loud. And about 10 o'clock, I got a knock on the door. Door opens, and there in Singapore at that time, there was police that dealt with civil matters, and there were police that deal with criminal or violent matters. So these were the civil ones, the social behaviour, etc. They would knock at the door. They were not, there's none that, excuse me, can we come in? They just came into the room, 3 of them, and said, turn the music off. I mean, like, no niceties, no, can you turn the music off, please? No, turn the music off now. And we knew, we were all a bit drunk, but we knew what they were like. So we switched the music on, and he goes, right, who rents this flat? And of course, the guy came across, and They just said, we're all there. Nobody goes, oh, you're effing, don't, nobody says a word because they'll just put you in jail immediately. He turns to the guy that rented the flat. He just says, if you turn this music back on and you disturb your neighbours again, I will come back, I will take all your music equipment and I will arrest you. So this is the only warning you're going to get. And we all just went, yeah, okay. We did not put the music. The party was over. But I'm going to stop now. I really, really hope you enjoyed this little story. This will be episode 8. And I really, really appreciate you just taking the time to listen. And I really, really hope you enjoyed it. You guys take care. All the best.